What would you do if the person who betrayed your family wasn't a stranger or a colleague, but someone you'd invited into your home for your child's birthday party? Someone who once stood beside you, holding a slice of cake, smiling for group photos, clinking glasses while the kids laughed in the background. Before we dive into this story, subscribe now, because what happened in Tallahassee could happen in any neighborhood, to any parent, at any moment. Rachel Owens was 38 years old, a mother, a civil servant, and a woman who had quietly rebuilt her life after a draining divorce. She and her son Jamie, age 11, lived in a modest single-story house with a screened-in porch and a backyard just big enough for a trampoline and a folding table for birthday parties. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, predictable, safe. Jamie had adapted well to life after the divorce. He was bright, imaginative, and had formed a bond so strong with another boy at school, Aiden, that Rachel had come to see Aiden as an extension of her own son. The boys were inseparable. Weekends were for sleepovers. Weekday afternoons meant trading Pokémon cards. And they shared a habit of building cardboard cities on the living room floor. Aiden's father, Thomas, was a widower. His wife had died in a car accident 3 years prior. And since then, he had become a regular figure in the school community. Quiet, attentive, always present at PTA meetings and soccer games. Rachel first noticed him during a spring fundraiser, where he was helping arrange folding chairs. He had kind eyes and a worn wedding band he still wore. Though loosely, their interactions began in the most harmless of ways: shared carpool duties, joint birthday planning, occasional chats during pickup. Thomas was always polite, his voice low and patient. When he smiled, there was a sadness behind it that Rachel recognized, an echo of her own. Then came the texts. At first, it was coordination. Jamie left a book in my car. Then it became friendlier. Your casserole was a hit. Aiden asked for seconds. Eventually, it turned personal. Ever feel like the nights are louder after the kids fall asleep? Rachel hadn't dated anyone seriously since her divorce. There had been a few coffee dates, one awkward dinner that ended with a handshake, and lots of late-night overthinking. But Thomas was different. He understood the quiet grief of parenting alone, the exhaustion that never made the headlines of single life. Their conversations grew longer. They started sharing music, old photographs, parenting stories. One night, during a birthday party at Rachel's house, the kids were outside playing tag under the string lights while the adults cleaned up in the kitchen. Rachel handed Thomas a dish towel, and their fingers touched for a moment too long. Neither pulled away quickly enough. She caught his gaze, and for the first time, it didn't feel neighborly, it felt dangerous. Still, nothing happened that night, nothing explicit, just a lingering sense that something was starting. In the weeks that followed, they found excuses to see each other more. Thomas offered to help her fix a sagging porch step. Rachel offered to pick up Aiden from soccer when Thomas worked late. They laughed easier. The silences between them were no longer awkward, they were weighted. And then Jamie asked, innocently, "Why does Mr. Thomas text you more than he texts Aiden?" Rachel's breath caught. She smiled too quickly, said something about parent stuff, and changed the subject. But the question lingered. Jamie had noticed, and if he had noticed, who else would? Rachel tried to justify it to herself. She wasn't doing anything wrong. They were just talking, just leaning on each other in a hard season. But she knew how easy it was to tip from comfort into craving, from texting into touching. She told herself that if anything happened, they would handle it privately, with discretion, with care. What she didn't consider was that children, especially ones as intuitive as Jamie, feel the tremors long before the quake. Rachel's days took on a dreamlike quality. She floated through her job, counting down the hours until she could check her phone. Her nights were split between mothering and messaging. The line between friend and lover blurred faster than she expected. She didn't want to call it an affair. Affairs were ugly, deceitful things. This wasn't that. This was connection. This was healing. But the truth was already shifting under her feet. And even the softest footsteps can leave cracks in the floor. She began to notice how Jamie looked at her when she dressed up more than usual to go grocery shopping. How Aiden stopped asking to come over on Fridays. How the other parents at school began to pause before greeting her. Their smiles a little too tight. Their conversations a little too clipped. Something unspoken was building, a quiet pressure, like a storm forming behind a sunny sky. And Rachel, caught between denial and desire, could feel it. She just didn't know how close it was to breaking. The beginning had felt like light. But already, shadows were creeping in, and somewhere, between the jokes, the hand grazes, the stolen glances, a truth was waiting, one that would not be ignored much longer. And when it came, it wouldn't just break her. It would break the children. And that was a kind of ruin no grown-up could ever undo. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. The kind of quiet day when nothing much is expected to go wrong. Rachel had just returned from grocery shopping, the real kind this time, and was tossing bags onto the kitchen counter while Jamie sat in the living room scrolling through old photos on her phone. He was looking for a picture of himself and Aiden at last summer's water park trip. Rachel had encouraged it, anything that might keep her son smiling a little longer. Minutes passed before she heard a soft, almost imperceptible sound, the long pause of breath being held. She turned around. Jamie was still, eyes locked on the screen, his lips parted but unmoving. When she stepped closer, he quickly pressed the home button and placed the phone face down on the coffee table. "What's up, sweetie?" she asked, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Nothing," he replied too quickly, just couldn't find the picture. But Rachel could see it in his face. Something had shifted. There was distance in his eyes. Not anger, not even confusion, just a kind of wary silence that hadn't been there an hour ago. That night, Jamie didn't ask to play his usual video game after dinner. He said he was tired. He brushed his teeth without being asked and slipped into bed with a quietness that unnerved her. When she came in to say good night, he turned his back to her before she could kiss his forehead. "Everything okay?" she asked softly. "Yeah," he said, "just sleepy." Rachel stood in the doorway for a long time after turning off the light. Her heart felt unsettled, but she had no idea why. It wasn't until the next morning, when she picked up her phone and noticed the conversation thread with Thomas had been left open, that it clicked. A series of messages were still visible, the most recent ones just coy enough to raise questions in a child's mind. "Wish you were here instead. Can't stop thinking about last night. Still smells like you." Nothing graphic, nothing obscene, but for an 11-year-old boy with a best friend whose dad was the man behind those words, it must have felt like discovering a lie you didn't even know was being told. Rachel felt sick. Her first instinct was to call Jamie, to explain, to soften the impact. But what would she say? That she and Thomas were just, what? Friends? That nothing had really happened? Jamie wasn't a toddler. He understood enough. And worse, he felt it. The next few days grew harder. Jamie stopped asking to go over to Aiden's house. When Rachel offered to invite Aiden over, he shrugged and said, "He's probably busy." She texted Thomas in panic. "Rachel, Jamie saw something on my phone. I think he knows." Thomas, "Knows what? We haven't done anything wrong." Rachel, "You and I know that. But he doesn't see it that way." Thomas, "Then we explain. We're two adults who care about each other." Simple. But it wasn't simple. Rachel knew that when kids feel betrayed, it isn't filtered through logic or context. It's emotional, raw. Jamie hadn't just stumbled upon a private exchange. He'd seen a fracture forming in the foundation of the one place that was supposed to be safe. He was quieter at dinner, spoke less, kept his eyes on his plate. When Rachel asked about school, he gave monosyllabic answers. When she mentioned Aiden, he changed the subject. Thomas, meanwhile, seemed oblivious to the growing weight of it. He still sent morning texts. Still asked if she wanted to go for a walk after the kids were asleep. Still used phrases like, "Maybe this is our chance." Rachel couldn't bring herself to tell him the truth. That her chance had already passed the moment Jamie looked at her like a stranger. One night, after putting Jamie to bed, Rachel sat outside on the porch steps, staring at the lawn. The porch light flickered. She didn't fix it. She let the shadows fall across her bare feet and thought about the way Jamie used to climb into bed with her after nightmares. About how he once said, "You're my favorite person in the world." She felt like a thief, not because she had fallen for Thomas, but because she had let herself believe that falling didn't have consequences. Inside, Jamie lay awake, the glow of his nightlight casting long shapes on the ceiling. He didn't cry, he didn't ask questions, but he did stare at the photo on his nightstand, a picture of him and Aiden laughing in the sprinkler last summer. It looked like a different life. He turned the photo face down. At school, Aiden noticed. He asked Jamie what was wrong. Jamie said, "Ask your dad." Rachel got a call from the guidance counselor 2 days later. Jamie had refused to partner with Aiden in a group project. When asked why, he simply said, "We're not friends anymore." Rachel's heart sank. She called Thomas. This time, her voice shook. "He doesn't want to see Aiden anymore. He won't talk to me. He won't look me in the eye." Thomas paused. "Kids fight. They'll get over it." "No," Rachel said. "He feels betrayed. And I think he's right." For a moment, there was silence on the line. Then Thomas said, "So what? We just stop, pretend we don't feel anything?" Rachel swallowed hard. "Maybe we pretend for a while. For them." Thomas didn't argue, but he didn't agree either. Rachel knew that the space between her and her son would not be bridged by silence, or by rationalizing, or by pretending nothing had changed. It would take time, honesty, maybe even pain. And for the first time since it all began, she questioned not her feelings, but her timing. Because sometimes love isn't wrong. But when it costs a child his trust, it doesn't feel right either. And in the quiet space between those two truths, something had broken. Rachel didn't know how to fix it, but she knew she had to try. It started with a glance. An ordinary Thursday afternoon, school dismissal chaos in full swing. Rachel had pulled her car to the curb, the same as every other day, when Thomas slid into the passenger seat. A quick chat, a shared joke, a few moments to decompress before picking up the boys. But from across the lot, someone was watching. Not just someone, it was Amanda, Thomas's late wife's sister. She had custody of some of her sister's personal effects and was still close to Thomas and Aiden. Amanda had always played the role of the quiet observer, respectful, never interfering, but when her eyes landed on Rachel and Thomas sitting too close in a car that wasn't meant for two, her silence became suspicion. Rachel didn't see her, but Amanda saw everything. The next sign came less subtly. 2 days later, in the Facebook group for Room 5B parents, someone uploaded a blurry image taken at a supermarket parking lot. Rachel and Thomas, walking side by side with reusable grocery bags. No caption at first, just the image. Then a comment below, "Tight-knit school community" or "tighter than we thought." Another parent chimed in, "Friendly co-parents" or "friendly co-parents." Rachel saw the post late that night. Her stomach turned. She felt a wave of nausea, not because of what was implied, but because of what it meant for Jamie. Within a day, whispers turned into hallway pauses. Invitations to weekend birthday parties dried up. Aiden came home in tears. "They said Dad stole my best friend's mom." Rachel's world began to constrict. Not from guilt, but from consequence. Jamie confronted her a week later. "You promised you weren't hiding anything," he said, his voice shaking, standing in the kitchen with his fists clenched. "I wasn't hiding, I was protecting," Rachel whispered. "Protecting who? Not me." He walked away. His door slammed. It stayed closed for hours. Rachel sat at the table, staring at her untouched dinner. Across town, Thomas was doing the same. Aiden had shouted at him too, said he didn't want to talk, that everything was ruined. And then came the twist that Rachel hadn't seen coming. Thomas invited her over one evening, after the kids were asleep. She hesitated, but went anyway, hoping to find clarity. As they sat in his living room, surrounded by the stillness of another interrupted life. She glanced down at a small leather wallet that had spilled open on the table. Inside it, tucked where the ID card should be, was a photo. It was his wife, still young, still radiant, forever framed by a smile that spoke of a life unfinished. Rachel's breath caught. "She's been gone for 3 years," she said softly. "I know. You still carry her with you." Thomas nodded. "She's part of who I am." Rachel swallowed. "Do you tell Aiden about us?" Thomas hesitated. Then, too quickly, "No, I don't want to confuse him." Rachel felt something sharp twist in her chest. Confuse him or upset him? He didn't answer. It was then she realized. She wasn't a new beginning. She was a refuge. A place Thomas ran to when he was lonely, overwhelmed, aching, but not a place he had truly invited into his future. Back at home, Jamie sat on the floor of his room, looking through a photo album, page after page of birthdays, school plays, camping trips with Aiden. He lingered on one where their arms were thrown around each other. Silly hats on their heads. They looked invincible. He felt betrayed not just by what his mom had done, but by how fragile everything felt now. Like childhood itself was under attack. At school, Jamie and Aiden got into an argument during recess. Words were exchanged, then fists. Teachers pulled them apart, but the damage was done. Two best friends, divided by adult decisions. Rachel received another call from the school counselor. This time, it wasn't just about tension. It was about aggression. They need space, the counselor said. They need clarity, and right now, neither child knows what's happening around them. Rachel broke down in her car outside the school. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel. Her heart felt like it was unraveling. She didn't want to lose Jamie, but she already felt it happening. That night, Thomas called. His voice was flat. "I think we need to pause. For the boys." Rachel nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "I know." Neither of them said what they both knew to be true. That this had never been about just them. That in trying to escape loneliness, they had created more of it, for the ones who trusted them most. Rachel tucked Jamie into bed that night. He let her, but he didn't say goodnight. He turned away, curling into himself. In the darkness, she whispered, "I'm sorry." She didn't expect a response. But after a long silence, Jamie said, "I wish you had told me the truth. I didn't know how. Next time, just don't lie." Rachel nodded, even though he couldn't see it either. Some mistakes don't scream, they echo. And hers had just started to. The parent-teacher conference was scheduled for 6 p.m., but Rachel arrived 10 minutes early. As she always did, the hallways of the elementary school were lined with colorful student artwork and motivational quotes. Usually, she found comfort in the familiarity. Not tonight. Tonight, the air felt heavy, as she stepped into the multi-purpose room where the parents of room 5B had gathered. The conversation stopped. A dozen heads turned subtly. No one said a word. The silence wasn't loud, but it was sharp. Rachel smiled out of habit, then took a seat near the back, clutching her folder tighter than necessary. Her ears buzzed with the absence of chatter. For the first time, the sense of community that had once surrounded her now felt like a wall closing in. Thomas entered 5 minutes later. He looked tired, unshaven. He didn't glance her way. The teacher began the meeting. Curriculum updates, upcoming field trips, fundraising notes. Rachel tried to focus, but the words blended into a soft blur. After the meeting, as the other parents gathered in small cliques near the refreshment table, Rachel made her way toward the exit. Thomas intercepted her just before the double doors. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. They stepped outside into the dimly lit parking lot. The air was cooler than usual, crisp with fall. For a moment, neither spoke. "I got pulled aside today," Thomas finally said, "by the principal." Rachel blinked. "Why?" she said, delicately. "That our situation is becoming a distraction. That it's impacting the boys. That we need to reconsider how public we are." Rachel exhaled slowly. "We haven't done anything inappropriate. We've been careful." Thomas shook his head. "It doesn't matter. In a place like this, perception is truth. Rachel's voice rose. So now it's my fault. Because I let myself feel something real after 2 years of being invisible. That's not what I said. But it's what you meant. You've been hiding me, Thomas. From Aiden. From your world. From yourself. He looked down, jaw clenched. I didn't want to make things worse. For who? Rachel asked. For the boys? Or for your guilt? That hit him hard. Don't twist this, he said. You knew from the beginning this was complicated. I knew it would be messy. I didn't know I'd be the only one willing to own it. They stood in silence, just two shadows arguing in a school parking lot under dying streetlights. Back at home, Jamie was upstairs, supposed to be asleep, but the walls were thin, and his room sat just above the kitchen where Rachel had her follow-up call with Thomas. He heard every word, her frustration, her pleading, her cracking voice. When she came upstairs, he was sitting upright in bed. You're fighting with him again, he said plainly. Rachel froze. Jamie, it's because of you that I don't have a best friend anymore. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. He continued, Aiden doesn't talk to me. Kids at school whisper. Teachers look at me weird. I didn't ask for any of this. I know, she whispered. No, you don't, because if you did, you wouldn't have done it. Rachel stepped into the room. But he turned away. I thought you were the one person who'd never lie to me. He said, but you lied. To me, to his dad, to everyone. She knelt beside the bed. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. But you did. His words weren't cruel, they were just true, and that made him unbearable. Rachel cried that night, quietly, in the laundry room, clutching a towel so the sobs wouldn't echo. Her love had become a weapon. Her choices, once rooted in loneliness, had bloomed into betrayal. Later, she texted Thomas, we can't keep doing this. He replied, I know. There were no more late-night walks. No secret glances. Just silence. The following week, Rachel dropped Jamie off at school. As he stepped out of the car, he paused. Will it ever go back to the way it was? He asked. Rachel gripped the steering wheel. I don't know, but I'll try. He nodded, then walked away. Rachel sat there long after the bell rang, the empty passenger seat beside her saying everything she couldn't. Some relationships aren't ruined by the absence of love, but by the timing of it. And this one, she knew, had arrived too late, and cost too much. Rachel knew what had to be done. It wasn't just about her anymore, it hadn't been for a long time. After the final fallout with Thomas and the irreversible damage between Jamie and Aiden, she decided to move forward with clarity, not denial. She transferred Jamie to a different school, not because she wanted to run, but because staying meant reliving the stares, the whispers, the unspoken blame. It meant prolonging the ache in her son's chest every time he walked past the classroom they used to share with Aiden. The new school wasn't far, just across town, but it felt like a continent away. A fresh start cloaked in bittersweet necessity. Jamie didn't object. He didn't cheer either. He just nodded. Rachel saw in his eyes a wisdom no child should be forced to carry. Thomas didn't reach out again. Not really. There was one message, a short one, saying he understood. That he was sorry, that he hoped, someday, things would heal. But healing, Rachel had learned, wasn't just about time, it was about repair. And some bonds weren't meant to be repaired. They were meant to be let go of. Tenderly, like releasing a balloon you once clung to during a storm. Then came the news she didn't expect. The school district had quietly launched a review into Thomas's conduct, not for any specific wrongdoing, but for compromising the professional parent boundary. Some parents had complained, others had remained silent, but their silence had weight. The image of the devoted, grieving single father cracked. Thomas stayed out of sight after that. Jamie began therapy. It took weeks for him to say anything more than "I'm fine" in those sessions. But eventually, he started drawing pictures of roller coasters, of two boys on bikes, of a house with just one adult figure and a speech bubble that said, "I'm still here." Rachel sat outside the office during those sessions, wondering if he'd ever trust her again. if she could ever be the safe harbor she had once been. Every time she saw him sitting alone at lunch, or playing video games by himself, she felt the pull of regret. She wondered how many smiles she'd stolen from him for the sake of one warm night. One soft word, one adult craving for connection that had cost her child something irreplaceable. At night, when the house was still, she'd stare at the ceiling and replay it all, the first glance from Thomas. The texts, the moments of guilt she ignored. She'd try to pinpoint the second it all should have stopped. But there wasn't just one. There were dozens, and she'd missed them all. One evening, a few months later, she found Jamie sitting cross-legged on his bedroom floor, flipping through a small box of keepsakes. Photos, mostly, school snapshots, drawings, party invitations. He held a picture of him and Aiden, both boys covered in cake frosting, laughing, arms slung over each other like nothing could ever break them. Rachel sat beside him. For a long time, neither said a word. Finally, she asked, "Do you miss him?" Jamie didn't look up. "Not him. I miss how it felt when I believed you." The sentence split her in two. She didn't defend herself, didn't reach for a speech or an apology or a promise. She simply placed her hand on his shoulder. "I miss that too," she said. He didn't pull away, and maybe that was the first step. Some wounds don't close with words, only with presence and time. Rachel stayed there that night, curled next to her son on the carpeted floor, surrounded by scraps of a past neither of them had meant to destroy. She knew she couldn't erase the damage, but she could sit with it, hold it, let it breathe, and maybe, just maybe, that was what healing really looked like. Quiet, honest, and willing to begin again. If this story made your heart ache, you're not alone. And if you're still with us, thank you. These aren't just tales of betrayal. They're mirrors of trust, love, and the cost of silence. Subscribe to Infidelity Chronicles and turn on the bell, because next time, we'll tell you the story of a little girl who didn't speak a word for 2 years. Until one night, she finally did, and what she said shattered everything. Right finger. Next episode, Joel from Sarasota, the affair broke his adopted daughter's silence. Don't miss it.